Everybody, welcome to the Castellani Art Museum here at Niagara University campus. I'm here to show you my collection, as has been for the last few months. I've been so incredibly blessed to have all of this on display for this long and for so many people in the most publicized exhibit in the history of this institution. My name is Justin John Martin Higner, and I'm the Commodore of this collection. This is a 25-year-long collection and has been going on for that long, and there are roughly 200 ships total in the entire collection's history, and those are 200 I can actually remember building, because in some cases I don't really remember if I built as many at times. You know, some have slipped the memory, but what you're seeing in this room are some of the best that has come out of those years. So let's start right here with the Oxfordshire 4, actually the newest addition to this room. It is part of a duo. Its sister ship is the Yorkshire II. It is a cargo container ship, and its job is to take bunches of goods and containers of goods and imported items back and forth from one place to another, like the container ships do in our world, and also bulk items like grain and wheat and things like that. And the Oxfordshire 4, and there's been 4 of them, is right here today, and its job is to actually collect from you, the viewer, and the visitor. And what people have done is brought little trinkets here to actually fill in the containers that are open. And there's some really very interesting and fun stuff in here that's come in. So I just want to thank everybody for contributing their items. And there are all sorts of different things here. There's jewelry here. There's a little rat over here. Don't worry, he's all caged up, not going anywhere. And even a bar of soap and a bag of little scissors and lots of little fun stuff in here. And so this ship is 14 feet long, roughly, and it took about a month to put together and build, and this was built right in my living room, actually, along with many of the other ones in here. So we can go over here, actually, to the next spot. These are in this case for a reason, because obviously we don't want them to, you know, get damaged, because they're small and a little more delicate than some of the other ones in here. These are Type 1 ships, and they're called Type 1s because of scale. Type 1 is of this scale here, where you're building a very large ship in a small space. You have the other ones in this room, which are mostly Type 2s, where each deck is this high, and you can accommodate finished interiors and everything in there. Different scale entirely. These are some of the oldest in the entire collection. Each of these are roughly 20 plus years old each, and this one here, the Westminster, being the oldest in this case. It dates back to 1994, or middle of 1994, and was one of the very, very first, along with the cargo ship down here, the Alberta. At that time was called the Poseidon. She and her sister ship, the Hopkins, were 2 of the very first of that scale. And then we have another early one down here called the Imperio, and it is the last of what would be called my shoebox ships. Say that several times over. And it is called the Imperio, yeah, and it is over 20 years old right there. The other ones in this case are just over or under 20, and they represent some of the best in the collection. They've been retouched or restored for the most part to, you know, show what they kind of were supposed to look like in the beginning. And most of them are theoretical reproductions or productions of the White Star Line, the same company that owned the Titanic, and what the White Star Line would have done had it continued to, you know, sail the ocean and continue to build more ships, including the modern cruise ship age. So what would they look like? They might have looked like that. And then the very first one in the whole collection, I'll dial it back a notch, because this is the Clara Mont, not to be confused with the Robert Fulton pioneering steamboat. It was just my interpretation of that idea. Very, very simple, very primitive looking, right? With just one little smokestack and just enough room for a few people. And this was my interpretation of that very simple idea. And it's actually a crib mounted on a toddler's push bike, and with just a smokestack in the back there. All original pieces. And it's all been put together just as I remembered putting it together at the time. And there's a whole description right there, and it's in its own little case. And believe me, having done all of this, and also to see this in a case when I was just fooling around back then, is a really very much a treat to see this. Very surreal experience to see something like that in the case. So we'll proceed actually over here, and these are some storyboards, if you will, of the history of the collection and the philosophy of it, which is really about creating worlds and building upon my life experiences, translating those life experiences into the manifestations you see here. In this case, ships, because ships travel. And well, as ships travel, they bring people, they bring ideas, they bring products all over the world, and really ships were the catalysts ultimately for the development of the human race. And so I figured, as I developed as an artist, these things conveyed my ideas over time, and then they built up to what you're seeing in here today. And so this explains a lot of the various techniques and preparations that are needed to put together one of these ships. So we'll start over here with some of the ones that are on display. This is an ocean-going tugboat called the Teutonia, and it is the biggest of a fleet of tugboats owned by the Leyland Tug and Barge Company. This boat was actually a different kind of ship for Barbies, actually. It had a different top entirely, and they were supposed to sit down inside the boat and do pleasure craft stuff. And then I took just the hull part and rebuilt it to be instead a big tugboat, because it actually looked more like an ocean-going tugboat than what Mattel had put together. So that's what that became. Here we have the Diamond Isle 3, and the latest in the lineup of party ships, quote unquote. It was simply the ship in the collection that was the most fun to be on and to party on and to enjoy company and so forth. And this is a very sleek, modern interpretation of a couple of others that have had that name, and is owned by Diamond Cruise Lines. That's an old name in the collection. Up here we have the Peridot Isle, and Peridot is my birthstone, by the way, August, and it's a very awesome deep granite stone, and I love the lower layers of the Earth's crust, the upper level, the upper mantle area. The rocks that come from that are some of the most interesting in the world, and Peridot is one of them. And I just thought that's just great for me. I love earthy stuff. And this ship has been, well, it's actually rebuilt from another one that I made from before, and a whole new top was put onto it. So it became Peridot Isle. This right here is the Sahara. This is a personal favorite in the collection. It's undergone several names and color changes over the years. It's now owned by Savannah Cruises. This is a nice little compact ship that basically goes down riverways like most of the other ones in here. And it was originally built as a Nebula 1 for Solar Star lines, and then it changed identities after that, and then it became what you're seeing here. As you can tell, there's a cord sticking out here because this ship, like others in the collection, are illuminated all the way through, and helps to bring out the life from the inside out, just like on the real ships. You light it up and it brings out the life. Here we have the Gemini Star 2 right in there, and she goes back quite a ways too. Not the most remarkable, not the the least remarkable, but it is just one of those intermediate ships of mine. And she's actually been retouched and redone for the show. Although she used to be for a line called Fiesta Cruises, which is a Spanish-oriented company, and once, if you will, and when I say company, by the way, I mean like an ownership experience within the collection. We're talking about their own stories and their own lore and their own experiences, and they have their own companies, they have their own shipyards, and they have their own nomenclatures, and they operate in this world that way. And so within that world we have lines like Fiesta Cruises and this ship's current owner, Zodiac Cruises. And you can see in this logo right here we have A, I, and A. Back then we had a role-playing game outside. We used different fields and forests, and they would be different nations and so forth. And these are abbreviations from my sister's name, my nephew's name, and a place name there, A, I, and A. This right here is the Kincardineshire. This is one of 4 ships in a fleet of expedition-style cruise ships, and this is where a lot of the collection is going now. Smaller, more capable craft that I could put in my car, incidentally, right, for certain little experiences and fun times. And this is one of them. Each of these ships are named after different counties or shires in Britain, because the Bostwick and Bernard line, another company I made up, specialized in, or has a, I should say, a heritage from the British idea, you know, so that's where that comes from. And then down here we have the Alexandria. The Alexandria, this was the Mississippi for Madison line, or Madison Cruise Lines, and it got transformed from being white and blue and yellow to being black and gold because the Madison Company zipped out of existence too. It closed a couple of years ago. I closed it. And the fleet got kind of sold, if you will, to Leyland. And they replaced a couple of other older ships, and they put these in instead. So it was redesigned and redone to be what you see today, along with the interiors. So this is actually a favorite ship. The front of it got smacked at some point and had to have a new bow put on. So that's why you can kind of see the front end is a little newer than the rest of it. It looks a little better now, though. This up here is an old one. This is the Devonshire. And this has actually been two other ships before this. It was a different kind of ship. It was a passenger ship at one point, and then it got rebuilt at some point into this cargo ship. You could say this is the father or grandfather to the first one we saw, the Oxfordshire IV. This is a smaller, more rudimentary kind of cargo ship. This one acts now as a floating museum for the company, if you will, in the state that it was in last time around. We can go to a big one right here. This is the Aquitania II, and this one here dates back about 20 years. It's been rebuilt once and refitted. This one actually has different themes within the inside of it, just like other ships in this collection, in terms of the four elements, actually. Each of these rooms represent a different earthy element: fire, earth, air, and water. The water is in the dining saloon. The spa and therapeutic center down there is Asiatic, and it actually themed, and it represents air. It's all light and very meditative. Also fire, which is represented at the nightclub, and water, which is represented at the back there, with the pool serving as a kind of pond, or retention pond or something. I don't know. In the middle of a forest glen, and that was a theme for that. And so this is a very special member of the collection right there. Back there we have the Neptune III. The Neptune III is for Solar Star Cruises, and it has a whole history of its own. But the one thing that I'll point out about this one, though, along with others in the collection, is that there are at least 3 artists on display inside of this. Most passenger ships in my collection have a number of artists, guest artists, I should say, on the displayed on the inside, and this is to help promote, especially my fellow local artists and craftsmen in this area who work very hard on what they do. And I love to display some of those works and artists that I admire and have them be expressed inside. So we have miniature art galleries within the larger gallery. And so actually I'm on display, yes, but so are 30 other people here. So if you look around, you'll see a lot of people here. This one here, I will definitely point out to you, is probably the favorite in the whole collection, called the Leviathan. And it's a favorite because it's served many, many roles, and it's appeared in many places for the size that she is, and has had a whole history unique to this particular piece. And she served, if you will, like the Queen Mary, if you will, in war and peace. And she has been decommissioned, and after a long period, even as a cruise ship for a while, and is now a floating museum, convention center, and hotel, and a memorial to the World War I doughboys and merchant seamen and others, naval personnel who served in the United States Armed Forces at that time, around the World War I period. So we have a poppy wreath right in front here to indicate that, and other different names and tributes across the front. Even Jimmy Carter and George H.W. Bush, among others here, are listed at the very front there. So this is a very, very special piece, and this is the one that probably resonates the most clearly in the collection. Very, very sacred. And so we have now, we can come in. Welcome, guys, by the way. Welcome to my show.
I made it.
Yeah, come on in, everyone. Join in. we're just continuing here. I'm just doing like a video tour here of the pieces. Okay. So come on in. Hi, Dawn. How are you, honey? Join in.
Yeah.
So next ship right here is the Violet Jessop. This is named after a nurse and a stewardess that served on board the Olympic, Titanic, and the Britannic, and she was on board for all three of their catastrophes. Iceberg, mining. The Olympic survived, though. She had a long career, but she served in all of them, and she was a wonderful person, and so I decided to name this after her. Actually, this was the Saturn I originally, not the spacecraft, obviously, but actually its sister ship was the Jupiter II. This ship was then commandeered or sold, if you will, to the Navy, if you will, Chio Navy of Mannheim, and it was turned into the Violet Jessop, and it kind of stayed that way afterwards. This ship is one of the very few in the whole collection to actually stay as it was originally built. So you see it as it appeared essentially in 1997, over 20 years ago. This is the state of things. Now, if you need a tissue, don't take it from in here. I know there are Kleenex boxes in there, but hey. Right down here is a shipwreck. Actually, Mother Nature gets credit for this as much as anything else, because this was stored out back, and our back garage there has some issues, and so it was left out to nature, and nature kind of ruined it, but also put on a whole other level in the collection, because now, instead of it being a ship, now it is a kind of shipwreck. And oddly enough, when these ships decay or fall apart, they kind of mimic the actual ships on the seafloor. And it just happens to work out that way. And I decided to save it, freeze everything in place, repaint it, and it has taken on a whole other identity then. It has become a waste, if you will, and yet something absolutely beautiful, which is something that goes back to nature then. Life and death. That's what it's all about in here, actually. Here we have a little piece on display. This is a little piece of the floor, or the entrance foyer, right out of the middle of the Jupiter II, which was twice the size of this one. And looked a lot like this, only had 3 funnels across the top. And was awfully large. The hull of it does survive, actually. I do have it at home, but I didn't bother with it this time around. But the floor, the most beautiful part from in there, was cut out, and it was preserved that way. I think it's a kind of mermaid. I don't know. It is what it is. And so it was put in there to kind of augment this part of the history of the collection, which is, again, around 1997, 1998, which is a world away from some of the ones you see in here now, like the Romania here. Romania, actually, the Romania here was built as a Julius Caesar originally for the Italian grace lines. It's been rebuilt a couple of times and modernized and redecorated, although the front room in here remains pretty much the same as it was back in 2001 when I built it. And this was also the first ship in the whole collection to be dedicated to something or someone. And it was actually to the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attacks that occurred. It was under construction at about that time, and when it was launched, it was dedicated to them. Also to other events since then, like the Pulse nightclub shootings, as well as Sandy Hook and a couple other things here. So since it has a lot of weight there too, but the interiors are really cool. In terms of just the carpeting alone right in there. The carpeting, if you will, it can be fabric from bolts that you find in the stores, but this particular fabric is actually seating upholstery. And actually, when you put it in something like this, it takes on the character of actually a carpet, and it works out very, very well that way. Up here we have the Windsor Castle, and the Windsor Castle was what I call actually a Type 3 ship, where the scale is, each deck being about this high each. You put a little Fisher-Price figure or something through it. And this has been just left as it was, again, around 1998, 99 when I built it. And I just simply restored it with some hot glue and repainted the funnels. But it's essentially, it is as you saw it, as you see it here. And it kind of reminds you as to what's underneath the paint on some of these ships here, underneath the spray paint. Looks like that, really. And that's a very special piece too. One of the last of her kind of that size still around. Here is the Aries Star 2. This one was also from Fiesta Cruises originally. It used to be white with red and yellow on it, and then the fleet got sold, if you will, to Zodiac Cruises and became the Aries Star II. There's a scene on the inside in there. That's a little scene in there. It's a stage dancing scene in there that I drew out and plopped in the back there. This was a pretty revolutionary ship when I built it about 12, 13 years ago. Right here is the Bavarian. Excuse me, the Bavarian of the Ward Line Classic Cruises. So if you enjoy the old days when brass was brass, and you know what I mean, this is the cruise for you. And it's just a nostalgic thing. She is a cruise ship, but she's also a part museum ship. So I thought that's a kind of merger of the old and the new, like when someone sails on the John W. Brown, one of the last Liberty ships in the world. Or one of the last in its original condition, that's considered a cruise, but also a historic tour. And so that's a unique experience that I figured some of my passengers, if you will, would enjoy having, like we do now. The anchor chains, if you will, are bought from Value Home Center there. I just asked for a couple of lengths of chain, and they're installed on the boats. And on the Leviathan over there, that I showed you earlier, her anchor chains go directly to actual anchors that are at the very front of it there. So she could actually kind of use them. Here we have the Edmund Fitzgerald. This piece is displayed every year in the village of Lewiston at a wonderful event that we have there that commemorates the lives of 29 people who died in the original. This is one of the few ships in the whole history of the collection to actually be modeled after a real vessel in history. All the way through. In fact, she comes in 4 pieces, so I can put it in my car or and get it, there. Okay, believe it or not, yeah. The midsections go in the back seats, and the stern section will go either in the front seat or the trunk, and the front section will go in the front seat or the trunk. So that's how she gets around for that. She actually was on display here at the time of the last event we had in late October, and so she took a break, sailed from here into the village, and she was back 2 days later, and people were asking me where to go, and I said, oh, she had to take a vacation, she got other people to see. Hold on, I'll be right back. So, and then she came back. It was interesting how we displayed this. Because she comes in pieces, we had to devise a different way for her to sit on the shelves here. And all these shelves are custom made, by the way, for the show here. So they did a huge amount of work in here. The staff here have been absolutely wonderful. Another piece here is another diorama sort of scheme. This is a diorama, so it's not just a ship on display. This is a whole activity going on here. And this is of a ship being pulled up onto the beach and gradually cut up. When a ship is retired, you can't just put in a crusher or something in, like a car or whatever. There's a whole other process involved. You have to really clean it out to, environmental damage, prevention. And the ship is sold off to scrappers. These are specialized people. They take the ship and they either pull it up to the shore, or they drive the engines and they ram it up, purposely grounding it. And then with chains at the front, they gradually bring the thing in over the beach and they start slicing away at it. And this was a ship that was kind of far gone for me anyways, but in good enough shape to represent an old ship that had just not, which couldn't really be serviceable anymore. And so it's sold off. But at the same time, it creates a different kind of display then, because what you're seeing then is the end of the life of a ship, as anything else, and it slowly going back to nature, if you will. But there's always a little bit of beauty in everything. In the back of this ship here is some of the original decoration. A little flower display which was there before, and I kept it right in there with the light coming down on it as a kind of memorial, if you will. So that's, it took me a while to do this, and that was a fun project right there. This right here is the Calypso. And it is actually a ship that actually is a child's baby bathtub, actually, right here, if I could say that right. And my sister was based in this. Thank you. So I mean, and then eventually, of course, she grew up, and the thing wasn't needed anymore so much. So where did it go? It became a ship. It does kind of look like a a ship, doesn't it? You know, it's all curved this the way you see it. And right up on top here is actually the core of this ship actually dates back a long time. This is a little newer around the sides there. But as you can see, it's quite a little, you know, exception to the whole rules of the collection, because such a thing would be just too much of a stub to really float around like that, but it works here. So she's special. She serves as a floating you know, convention center or visitor attraction basically nowadays. This right here is the Fruito, is another kind of shipwreck. It's a shallow water shipwreck, I decided, and so it wouldn't have a lot of the really terrible rusty detail to it. Instead, it's got seaweed and all sorts of plant matter and that's washed into it and growing up in it. And the details in there are rather awesome as well. And again, Mother Nature did most of that. I just figured I'd just freeze it in place and put it on display on a board as you see it. It's straightforward. Finally, along this wall here, and well, actually we'll go to this one right over here. This is the Universe II, and this is the Great Ship of Light, actually. And it's called a Ship of Light because actually, and although it's not plugged in right now, it has 6 different light sets on board, including a whole mass of LED lights, 100-piece set right here hanging from the ceiling. And it comes down over a dining room, which has been redone a couple of times. But in essence, it is a galaxy, basically, in one room. And all the lights in there and all the different stars represent near and far stars in the cosmos swirling around. And there are other different rooms in here dedicated to other themes. There are 4 artists on board this one, and each of them help to enhance the whole spirit of it. Everybody from, let's see, I have, for example, Jacqueline Welch, Paul Thomas Hanover, and Chris Sedano, along with Charles Birchfield. And they're on display inside this one piece right here. This one took actually over a year to make because there was a delay in the construction, and so I had to revisit it eventually and finish it. The whole back end had to be redone. There was some water damage there before this show. And the process of rebuilding it, it got lengthened a little more. And so we have 4 additional luxury veranda cabins and suites then. So it worked out okay. But she's a very, very special piece in the collection too. She's meant to kind of represent a Carnival Cruise Lines kind of ship. Now finally, we have on the wall here, Savannah Cruises, the Savannah. And the Savannah is a trailblazer in the line. A lot of the later, smaller passenger ships were arranged like this in the future, very economical. So you have your interiors, and then you have your outdoor verandas for the public and all that. This arrangement was repeated several times. It was very successful. And then this is also the only ship in the whole collection to actually win awards. It competed in a contest called the Everyday's Earth Day contest at the Niagara Power Project, and she won first prize in the adult category or 11 and up category, and the People's Choice Award, or best in show basically. So that was a really special time. I never competed in anything before up to that point in 2014, but she won something there, so that was kind of neat. Right here we have the Australia, and she is actually a class of 4 ships. They're all called different regional names, again going with the IA nomenclature of Leyland Cruise Lines, or Leyland Royal River Cruises in this case, a division of the same idea. And this is called the Australia, another is called the Scandinavia, and the other 2 are called the Mauritania and the Patagonia. So we're representing different sections of the world. And this is a worldwide class of ships. Here we have both indigenous